They thought they had found the perfect nanny, kind, devout, and committed to caring for their children. She wasn't just an employee, she became a part of their family, trusted and cherished. Sarah and Omar had welcomed her into their home with open arms, believing that she would help them raise their kids with love and stability. But what they didn't know was that behind the smiles and the careful prayers, a secret was quietly growing, a secret that would eventually tear them apart. Years later, when Aisha finally confessed, it wasn't just a betrayal. It was a truth so painful, so earth-shattering, it made everything they thought they knew about their lives come crashing down. What she revealed would shake the very foundation of their marriage, their trust, and everything they held dear. Aisha had been a constant presence in Sarah and Omar's home for years. She was the nanny they had trusted, the person they relied on to help raise their children. Aisha had come into their lives through a mutual friend, recommended as someone with strong faith, integrity, and a genuine love for children. Sarah and Omar, feeling the weight of their demanding lives, welcomed her as not just a caretaker but as someone who would support their family dynamic. They were a young couple, both working hard to provide for their kids, and having someone like Aisha felt like a blessing. Aisha herself had been humble, soft-spoken, and appeared to have the best intentions. She had made it clear that her devotion was to her faith and the family she worked for. Omar admired her work ethic, while Sarah felt a bond with Aisha, almost like a sister. Couple's eldest child, Hadi, had developed a deep attachment to Aisha, often seeking comfort and reassurance from her in ways he never did from anyone else. Their home seemed full of love and joy. Sarah and Omar's marriage, despite the challenges of raising young children, was strong, built on mutual respect and trust. To them, Aisha was a part of their family, and they believed they were providing her with a safe space in return for her service. In truth, everything seemed perfect. They had no reason to suspect that, within the walls of their home, something was slowly changing, something neither Sarah nor Omar could or have prepared for. As the months passed, cracks began to form, small at first, unnoticed by everyone. Aisha's behavior started to shift, though no one could put their finger on it. At first, it was subtle, a distant look in her eyes during family gatherings, a hesitation when Sarah asked her to join in on the conversations. Omar noticed that sometimes, after the kids were in bed, Aisha would disappear for long stretches of time, saying she was praying or needed some quiet reflection. Sarah found herself wondering, but she didn't press. But there were moments when Aisha's gaze lingered a little too long, when she would avoid eye contact, or when the tension between her and Omar seemed to linger, barely perceptible but undeniable. They tried to brush it off. After all, they trusted Aisha completely. Still, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, though she couldn't explain why. Omar, on the other hand, was oblivious. He saw Aisha as a loyal employee, a trustworthy friend. He continued to praise her work, often telling Sarah how grateful he was to have someone like her around. The family life, he thought, was as peaceful as ever. But there was a subtle unease in the air, one that Sarah couldn't ignore. Little did they know Aisha was carrying a secret, a truth so heavy she couldn't keep it buried forever. And when it finally came to light, it would send shockwaves through the family, shaking the very foundation of their home. One evening, Sarah was doing the laundry when she came across something she hadn't expected. A small slip of paper tucked between the sheets with a phone number written on it. It seemed insignificant at first, just a random note. But something about it nagged at her. She decided to push it aside, but the feeling lingered, gnawing at her. The next day, Sarah was going through Omar's phone. She didn't mean to. She wasn't the type to snoop, but there was a subtle shift in the air, a sense that something wasn't quite right. She was looking for a picture of their daughter when her fingers brushed against a text message notification. The name on the screen caught her eye, Aisha. Curiosity overtook her, and before she could stop herself, Sarah opened the message. Her heart stopped as she read the words. It wasn't just a friendly exchange, it was personal. Too personal. A message from Aisha, asking Omar if he would be coming over later that evening. tone was intimate, the kind of message that had no place in the world of employers and employees. Sarah's hands trembled as she read through the thread. Each message, each exchange revealed a secret, a bond that should have never been formed. She felt like the floor had dropped out from under her. The betrayal she feared, the one that had been quietly simmering beneath the surface, had finally revealed itself in the harshest possible way. Her mind raced as she tried to process what she had just read. Was this real? Could it be a misunderstanding? Her thoughts were interrupted when she heard footsteps approaching. She quickly closed the phone, her heart pounding in her chest. That evening, as Omar sat in the living room, oblivious to the storm that had just begun, Sarah couldn't bring herself to confront him. She watched him from across the room, her eyes studying every movement, every smile. How could he have done this? How could Aisha, the woman she had trusted with her children, do this to her? The pain was sharp, almost unbearable, but Sarah couldn't let it show. The next morning, Aisha was in the kitchen, preparing breakfast. Sarah's mind was racing. She needed answers. She couldn't stay silent any longer. The facade of normalcy couldn't continue. The betrayal had to be addressed. As Sarah stepped into the kitchen, Aisha looked up, her expression unreadable. There was a brief silence, then Sarah spoke. "I know," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Aisha froze, her face going pale. Her lips trembled as she looked away, clearly struggling with the weight of the moment. I don't know what you mean," Aisha stammered, but Sarah could see the guilt in her eyes. It was there, undeniable, unspoken. The mask was slipping. Sarah took a deep breath, her voice breaking as she spoke again. "I saw the messages, Aisha. I know what's been happening between you and Omar." Aisha's face crumpled, and the tears she had been holding back spilled over, her guilt flooding to the surface. "I never meant for it to happen," Aisha began, her voice filled with anguish. "It was a mistake. I've carried it with me every day. The guilt, the shame. I didn't want to hurt you. I didn't want to destroy everything." She took a step towards Sarah, her eyes pleading. "Please, I'm so sorry. I never wanted this to happen. It just happened. I was weak. I couldn't stop it. I've tried so hard to push it away, but it wouldn't go." Sarah stood there, frozen, her heart pounding in her chest. She wanted to scream, to shout, to demand answers. But she couldn't. The weight of Aisha's confession hung between them, each word a sharp knife to her heart. Trust she had placed in Aisha, the bond they had shared, was gone, shattered in an instant. Aisha's voice faltered, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. "I'm so sorry, Sarah. I didn't want to betray you. I know I've ruined everything." Sarah didn't know how to respond. Every emotion in her was screaming, but she couldn't find the words to match the depth of the hurt she felt. How had this happened? How had she been so blind? Her mind raced, replaying every moment, every glance, every conversation between Aisha and Omar. How could she have missed the signs? "You've ruined everything," Sarah finally whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You've broken the trust one had in you, in both of you." The weight of the truth settled on Sarah's shoulders, crushing her with its finality. She had to make a choice. The family she had built, the love she had fought for, was now in question. She didn't know how to move forward. She didn't know what to believe anymore. The foundation of her life, built on love and trust, was crumbling before her eyes. And as Aisha stood before her, apologizing, offering nothing but regret, Sarah knew that nothing would ever be the same again. In the days that followed, Sarah felt like she was living in a fog, distant, disconnected from everything she had once known. The betrayal wasn't just a wound in her heart, it had severed the trust that had held her world together. Every glance at her children, every memory she had built with Omar now felt tainted. She couldn't shake the image of Aisha's tear-filled face, her apology ringing in her ears, yet she couldn't decide if it was genuine or just an escape from the guilt. She had welcomed Aisha into her home as family. Aisha was more than just a nanny. She had been a sister, a confidant. Sarah had trusted her with everything, her children, her home, her life. But now everything had changed. That trust was gone, replaced by a constant, gnawing anxiety. How could she ever trust anyone again? How could she rebuild a life that felt so broken? The children, especially Hadi, were also deeply affected by Aisha's sudden departure. Hadi, who had grown so attached to Aisha over the years, couldn't understand why she was no longer around. His small hands would often reach out for her, only to find that the space where she once stood was empty. The sadness in his eyes was too much for Sarah to bear. She had to explain it to him in the gentlest way possible, but the truth was too painful for both of them. "Where's Aisha, Mommy?" Hadi would ask, his voice laced with confusion. Sarah's heart broke each time. She didn't know how to explain betrayal to a child so young. How could she tell him that the woman who had cared for him, who had shared in their family moments, had broken the very trust that held their lives together? How could she explain to a child that some people, no matter how much you love them, can betray you in the most unimaginable ways? Meanwhile, Omar struggled to cope with the reality of what he had done. He sat in silence, often lost in his thoughts, staring blankly at the walls. Guilt consumed him, but it wasn't just for what he had done to Sarah. He couldn't forgive himself for the damage he had caused to their family. He had destroyed something precious, something irreplaceable, and he knew it. But the worst part was his denial. He couldn't fully accept the gravity of the situation. For days, he tried to convince Sarah that it was a momentary lapse, a mistake. He kept repeating that it didn't mean anything, that Aisha had been someone he confided in, someone who understood him in ways Sarah couldn't. But those words only stung Sarah deeper. She didn't need to hear excuses or justifications. She needed the truth, and the truth was that Omar had betrayed her. He was trying to rebuild their marriage, trying to apologize and make amends. But his words felt hollow, meaningless to Sarah. The love she once felt for him had been overshadowed by his betrayal. Every attempt he made to reconcile felt forced, like a desperate grasp at something that was already lost. The more he tried, the more she retreated. Sarah wanted to believe that things could go back to normal. She wanted to believe that they could fix their family, rebuild what had been broken. But no matter how hard she tried, the cracks in their relationship were too deep to ignore. Omar's attempts at rebuilding were rooted in guilt. He wasn't just sorry for betraying his wife. He was sorry for betraying everything they had built together, the trust, the love, the family. He couldn't look at their children without feeling the weight of his actions. But Sarah couldn't see past the hurt. She couldn't forget the image of Aisha's face, the whispered conversations, the lies. She couldn't trust the man who had betrayed her in the worst way possible. The emotional turmoil was unbearable for Sarah. Her mind was constantly in turmoil, questions she couldn't answer, feelings she couldn't express. She wanted to scream at Omar, to tell him how deeply he had hurt her, but the words got lost in the suffocating silence between them. Their once strong bond felt fragile now, and it seemed like every step forward was met with 2 steps back. The silence in their home was deafening. Where there was once laughter, there was only awkwardness. Where there was once warmth, there was only coldness. It felt as though their entire existence had become consumed by the betrayal. Every day was an uphill battle, a constant struggle to hold on to something that was slipping away. In the midst of all this, Sarah couldn't escape the cultural and religious weight of the situation. As a Muslim woman, her beliefs were deeply rooted in the values of family, trust, and loyalty. Her faith was an anchor, something that had always provided guidance through life's challenges. But now, her faith felt like a distant echo. How could she reconcile the love she had for her family with the destruction that had been caused? For Aisha, the cultural and religious implications were also immense. She had violated not just the trust of her employers but the very values she had been raised with. She knew the shame she would face in her community, the judgment that would follow her wherever she went. The guilt was suffocating. She couldn't escape it. Her relationship with Omar had been a betrayal to everything she held dear, her faith, her morals, her sense of self. And yet, the connection with him had been so real, so intense, that she couldn't completely push it away. She had tried to justify it, to believe that it was just a mistake, but deep down, she knew it wasn't. As Aisha reflected on her actions, she was forced to confront the truth of her choices. The guilt weighed heavily on her. She had broken the bonds of family, destroyed the trust of a woman who had welcomed her into her life. And no matter how sorry she was, she knew that the consequences of her actions would follow her forever. The weight of betrayal, the loss of trust, and the unbearable guilt had left their mark on everyone involved. For Sarah, it was the loss of her sense of security, her peace of mind. For Omar, it was the destruction of his own integrity, the betrayal of his vows. And for Aisha, it was the undeniable truth that she had lost something precious, something that could never be replaced. As the days went on, Sarah found herself questioning everything. Could she ever forgive Omar? Could she ever trust Aisha again? And most of all, could she rebuild her life after the damage had been done? The emotional toll was too much to bear, and Sarah was left standing in the rubble of her own heart, wondering if there was any hope left for a future she couldn't yet see. For weeks, Sarah grappled with the pain, the guilt, and the confusion. She was torn between the desire to preserve her family and the devastating truth of what had happened. Every time she looked at Omar, the man she once knew, she was reminded of the betrayal. She couldn't escape the image of Aisha, the woman who had so seamlessly entered their lives, now the face of destruction. But just when Sarah thought she had seen the depth of the wound, a revelation came that changed everything once again. It was a late evening when Aisha returned. Her face was tired, drained, as if the weight of the confession had aged her in ways Sarah hadn't expected. She stood at the door, hands trembling as she asked for a moment of Sarah's time. First, Sarah wanted to turn her away, to never see Aisha again. But something in her eyes, something unspoken, made Sarah pause. She agreed to meet. Aisha didn't come with excuses or apologies this time. She came with a truth that sent shivers down Sarah's spine. She didn't just confess out of guilt or love, as Sarah had assumed. There was something deeper at play, something that had been buried under layers of shame and secrecy. "Sarah, I never wanted this to happen," Aisha said, her voice barely a whisper. "But I couldn't stay silent anymore. The truth is that Omar and I didn't just have an affair. I didn't just betray you. I betrayed my own heart." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. What was Aisha saying? What did she mean by betrayed my own heart? Aisha took a deep breath, her hands clasping together as if holding on to the last bit of courage she had. "I've known for a long time that I wasn't just caring for you and your children. I wasn't just being a nanny. I was trying to fill a void in my life, one that I thought I could find in Omar. I thought he could be the answer, the love I needed, but it was never about him. It was about me. It was about the emptiness I felt within myself." The words hung in the air, dense and heavy. Sarah stared at Aisha, trying to process what she had just heard. Aisha's confession had shattered everything Sarah thought she knew about the situation. The affair wasn't just a momentary lapse of judgment, it was an emotional entanglement, a desperate search for something Aisha had never truly understood. "It wasn't just about him, Sarah," Aisha continued, her voice cracking. "It was about me trying to find myself through someone else. But when I realized the damage I caused, the betrayal of your trust, I couldn't live with it anymore. I had to tell you the truth." The words resonated with Sarah, but they also made her angry. angry that Aisha had been so blind to her own actions, so lost in her own feelings that she had destroyed the very thing she had once been a part of. But as Sarah listened to Aisha's raw honesty, something within her softened. Aisha wasn't just confessing to ease her conscience. She was trying to make amends for a mistake that had changed everything. Still, Sarah was torn. Could she forgive Aisha? Could she ever look at her the same way again? There was so much hurt, so much distrust. But the truth was, Aisha's confession had forced Sarah to look beyond the betrayal itself. It had forced her to confront something even deeper, something she had been avoiding, her own pain, her own fears of abandonment, her own brokenness. It was a cold night when Sarah finally decided to confront Omar. She asked him to meet her in the living room. The moment was charged with a tension that neither of them had been able to shake for weeks. When Omar sat down, his face was filled with shame, guilt, and fear. He didn't know what Sarah had learned, what Aisha had said. "Sarah, I'm sorry," he said, his voice breaking. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I failed you, failed our family." But Sarah was silent. She had heard it all before. The words didn't matter anymore. What mattered now was what she was going to do next. "I don't know if I can forgive you, Omar," Sarah said, her voice calm but filled with an intensity that shocked both of them. "I don't know if I can forgive Aisha either. But I'm starting to understand why things happened the way they did." Omar looked at her, confused. "What do you mean? What do you understand?" Sarah took a deep breath, her hands shaking as she placed them in her lap. "I understand that we're all searching for something. We're all trying to fill a void, a gap that we can't seem to escape. You did what you did because you were broken in ways I didn't see. Aisha did what she did because she was trying to find something in you that she couldn't find in herself. And I thought I had it all together, that our family was perfect. But it wasn't. None of us are perfect." Omar's face softened, but he couldn't speak. Sarah continued. "We're all just people, Omar. People who make mistakes, people who get lost. And we have to decide whether we can forgive each other, whether we can move forward." The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah felt like the weight of the world was on her shoulders, yet for the first time in weeks, she didn't feel entirely crushed. She had faced the truth, the painful, complicated truth, and it hadn't destroyed her. "I don't know what will happen, Omar," Sarah continued, "but I'm not ready to give up on everything yet. Not yet. But it's up to you. It's up to both of us." Omar nodded, his eyes filled with regret and hope. He knew that things could never go back to the way they were, but maybe, just maybe, they could rebuild something stronger, something real. As for Aisha, Sarah had made the decision to forgive her. It wasn't an easy decision, and it wasn't immediate. But in time, she recognized that Aisha wasn't just the woman who had destroyed her family. She was also a person who had been lost, who had sought comfort in the wrong places. And maybe, just maybe, they could both heal together. It wasn't a perfect resolution. There was no grand forgiveness, no magical moment where everything was fixed. But Sarah had learned something important. Healing was a process. And maybe, just maybe, it was worth trying. As the dust began to settle, Sarah sat alone, her mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. The house that had once been filled with warmth, laughter, and the daily hum of life, now felt heavy with silence. The walls, once a safe space, seemed to echo the fracture of what had once been a perfect family. The pain wasn't just in the betrayal. It wasn't just in the affair, the lies, or the secrets. It was in the loss of something she had never truly questioned, the trust that had held them all together. Sarah had spent days, weeks even, searching for answers. She had sought closure, or at least some kind of understanding that might allow her to move forward. But as time wore on, she realized that the answers she sought might never come. And so she had to decide whether to let this betrayal define her or to find the strength to move on, to rebuild. Omar, for all his guilt, could not change what had been done. Aisha's confession, raw and painful, could not undo the wounds that had been inflicted. They could apologize, seek forgiveness, and make promises, but promises, Sarah knew, were just words. Words were nothing without trust. And trust, once broken, was something that took more than time to heal. It required something far deeper, far more challenging. It required a choice. In the days that followed, Sarah found herself wrestling with that choice. Could she forgive? Could she ever look at Omar without the shadow of what he had done? Could she ever trust Aisha again after all the years of deception? Forgiveness wasn't easy. It wasn't the simple act of saying it's okay and moving on. Forgiveness meant facing the pain, the anger, and the heartache. It meant acknowledging the betrayal, not pretending it hadn't happened, but choosing to let go of the hurt in order to heal. And in choosing forgiveness, Sarah realized something. It wasn't just about giving Omar or Aisha the freedom to move forward. It was about setting herself free. Forgiveness, she understood now, was not an act of weakness. It was not about excusing the wrong or denying the hurt. It was a powerful choice. Choice to take back control of her own life, her own healing. To not be bound by the past, but to choose to move forward, even when the road was uncertain, even when the pain still lingered. And so, Sarah began the slow process of healing, one step at a time. She didn't know where it would lead or what the future would hold. But she knew this: trust, once shattered, could be rebuilt. Might never look the same again. Might never feel as it once had. But with time, effort, and honesty, it was possible to rebuild what had been lost. Could I forgive Aisha? Could I forgive Omar? Sarah asked herself these questions every day. The answer didn't come easily. But the question, perhaps, wasn't about them at all. It was about her. About her strength to choose forgiveness, even when it seemed impossible. And that, Sarah knew, was the only way to move forward. 'Cause in the end, forgiveness didn't just heal relationships. It healed the person who chose it. As the story unfolds and emotions settle, we're left with so many questions. Could you have forgiven them? Could you rebuild trust after everything that's happened? Or would the pain be too much to bear? If this story struck a chord with you, if it made you reflect on your own relationships or the complexities of forgiveness, then we want to hear from you. Hit the like button to show your support for these difficult but powerful stories, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Has this been a story of redemption or destruction? Do you believe there can truly be a path back after betrayal, or is that trust forever broken? Let's discuss. And if you want to hear more true stories that bring you deep into the heart of human experience, stories that will leave you speechless, don't forget to subscribe. Turn on notifications so you never miss a powerful emotional story like this one. Together, we can continue to explore, reflect, and learn from the real stories of life. Because sometimes the truth is stranger and more profound than we could ever imagine.